Everyone. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Lori. Long time no see.
All right, I'll just give a few minutes while our numbers are climbing. I see a lot of people coming in. Right, welcome if you're just joining. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm excited to welcome you to the NIH 2024 Career Symposium. We are just about to hear about careers in research, and we have a great, exciting panel with some folks from different areas, from academia, from industry, and from government to hear about the types of research that happen in different sectors. I'm very happy to hand this off to Lori Conlan, my colleague, who is amazing. So you're in very good hands. Thank you, Lori.
Thanks, Laura. I'm so excited to be here today and talk about research careers in all different sectors. I have not only the pleasure of having some phenomenal professionals here today, but also some very good friends. So I want to introduce you to first Dr. Eric Nicholson. He is at the Department of Agriculture out in Iowa. And note, Eric and I went to graduate school together, so we're having a good time. Jason Yee, who is now up in Boston at Generate Biomedicines. Sorry. Jason was actually a graduate student here at the NIH and also a postdoc, and so it's nice to see him back here too. Dr. Cindy St. Hilaire is at Pitt as let's see, she's probably got to be an associate professor now, so past tenure. She was a postdoc here at the NIH, and we had a very good time together back when I first started here at the NIH. And last but not least, of course, is Dr. Sandra Bonne-Annee, who is at Gilead scientist, also was a postdoc here at the NIH, and also I consider a very close friend. So I'm literally so excited to have all of you here with me today, and also to really kind of have us have a discussion around what does research look like in all of these different realms, right? So we have government, we have different types of industry, we have academics. So we'll be talking a lot about that. So I'm going to let everybody do a quick introduction of themselves. We'll start with Eric, Jason, Cindy, and Sandra. We'll just go around the room, just give a quick introduction, and then we'll start with my grilling and questions. So Eric?
I'm Eric Nicholson. I'm a research chemist and the lead scientist on the Prion Diseases Research Project at the National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa. The National Animal Disease Center is part of the USDA Agricultural Research Service, so the in-house research of the USDA.
Hi, my name is Jason. I am leading the CAR-T, chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy programs here at Generate Biomedicines. And just a short blurb, we're kind of at the interface of, AI, generative AI for biology. So it's certainly a lot of interesting, exciting things that is happening in our field. And that's also a lot of the things that I gained experience from my about decade plus spent at NIH. So there's a lot of learnings that I could certainly share from how that transition happened.
Hi, Cindy St. Hilaire, Associate Professor at University of Pittsburgh. And I'm super happy to be here. I love doing these career panel talks because when I was a postdoc at NIH, as Lori said, when she and Sharon were starting different things up, they were super helpful for me. So hopefully you all ask us really good questions. My path was, I did my PhD at Boston University School of Medicine and Biochemistry. I got a postdoc gig at the NIH. I was a Sally Rosen Kaplan Fellow for 6 months because I actually left my first postdoc because I didn't like it. So happy to talk about making hard decisions. But the second one, which was at NHLBI, was extremely successful. I worked with Manfred Bohm and also Bill Gall. We were kind of the first people working with what was then the Undiagnosed Disease Program, which is now the international success that it is. I'll stop there. Happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I am Sandra Bonne-Annee. I am currently a senior scientist at Gilead Sciences. And I, like most of the panelists here, are really happy to share my story and my perspective on research careers, particularly those that lead you to industry. I started off my really refining my training at Thomas Jefferson University, where I got a PhD in immunology, and then worked at NIH as a postdoc, as Lori mentioned. And I think my time there was really what set me on the path to industry. So I'm happy to share really what I've learned in the last 5 years. So after a postdoc at NIH, I did a brief stint at OITE as a detailee. And I'm happy to share that experience as well. But it led me really, truly to industry. And I've been at Gilead Sciences for the last 5 years, working on early discovery projects in both inflammation and now oncology.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I think one of the biggest questions when we think about research careers is how much time do you actually spend doing research, right? So how much time are you spending at the bench, so to speak? And I think a big question is all of us have had careers now. How has that changed over time? So like, what's your typical day, so to speak, look like now? And how did that change from when you first started? We'll start with Jason and then we'll kind of go around the room from there.
So definitely, less than I would like to. I think at heart, I'm still a research scientist, and I certainly view myself this way. I'm more in people management, program management mode right now, because we have certain things that are demanding in terms of building out the pipeline and getting drugs to patients. But I think the core is still the desire to be in the bench. Right now, I have maybe 10% of my time in the bench and most of my time elsewhere. But it's still, I think, similar to, maybe being like a PI in academia. You're still not necessarily, away from science. You're still guiding and mentoring scientists and overseeing, the progress of projects and so on. And so I'm maybe involved in different layers than directly on the bench.
Think I'm next. I'm just going to go next. I'll say when I started my lab. So here's the thing, right? You go from PhD. I'm talking academia now, right? I'm at University of Pittsburgh. You go from the PhD where all you're doing is in the lab. Maybe you're also writing papers and maybe you're writing a transition grant. But when you come here as a new faculty, you are the biggest brain in the room in your lab, right? Nobody knows as much as your project as you in who's in your lab. And I saw it as a cost per time. How much of my, brain space should be dedicated to like genotyping or culturing cells? And I decided very early it was zero. I am barely in the lab. I mean, my lab is literally out my room, but I'm not doing experiments. I never did at the start. I hired people right away. I trained them. I was in the lab training them. The minute they were off the ground and running, I put what I was hoping was a big brain towards writing that first RL1 and getting internal grants and setting up internal initiatives and actually trying to make that transition. It's not because I don't love it. That is the best part, really. I mean, mentoring is also great, but I do I do zero. I honestly do zero science. I guess, normal day. Normal day for me changes every day. It changes with grant cycles. It changes with deadlines. That's kind of one of the fun things. Maybe if you're very rigorous with your schedule, you don't do that. But me, like this morning, I got up, I went to the gym for an hour. I came in a little bit later than I usually do because I had this, and then I have to think about writing a review after this. But that's not every day. And that's, for me, part of the fun of it.
How about you, Sandra?
Yeah, a normal day for me, since I'm currently a senior research scientist, my commitment to the lab has dwindled over time. But I will say I can still spend about 25 to 30% in the lab. And for me, that right now is a great mixture. It allows me to pop in there. I use it as a period to really step away from my other responsibilities, and to get my hands, busy and involved in doing some wet lab work. But most days, like today, other than panel discussions, I would be, engaged in meetings, meeting with my team. As a manager, I now have to have one-on-one meetings. And if not in meetings, I think a lot of my time is spent strategizing, thinking about the experiments that my team needs to perform, working out the key questions that we should be addressing in order to build a data package that I would use to promote and pitch and sell a particular target to senior leadership. So there's a lot more computer work, a lot more time spent reading, coming up with that, crafting, experiments and approaches, backup approaches. And then occasionally there's some report writing and really high level meetings where you would be presenting to really key decision makers within the company. So that takes a lot of prep time, and that really encompasses most of the day-to-day.
So for me, there's no telling what I'll be doing on any given day. I used to have write down a plan, to-do list, and eventually got covered in a pile of papers, and it's still under that pile of papers. So I've been with USDA for 20 years. For the majority of that time, I've been the lead scientist. So I'm the PI. In the project, there are 4 PIs, including myself. So I am in charge of writing the project plan, the annual report. So the project plan is a 5-year research plan for all of us. And so, that's a year-long process of coordinating and writing and everything else. So I do still get in the lab, but it's more like if someone needs a particular spectroscopic technique run, I'll go in and do it because I like to do it. And it takes me less time than it takes me to teach someone else to do it. But other than that, I've hardly touched a pipette in 15 years. And I don't miss it. That was never collecting data was never my strong suit. It wasn't something I enjoyed. Like I liked getting the actual instrument time, but I didn't like all of the prep work that went into it. So now I have people that can do that for me. Once you get, everybody learns what their personal limit and supervisory capacity is. And you learn it when you've exceeded it. And so for me personally, that's 5 people. At 6, everything falls apart. If I had 6 fantastic postdocs or technicians, it could be 12. But if anybody needs extra, it derails in a hurry. So
I think it's interesting, as we all grow our careers, we tend to start moving away from the active use of science, right? Actual pipetting, doing that circular dichroism or whatever it is you do in your field. And I think part of it is just because as we grow in our careers, it's hard to stay. But do any of you know PhDs you're friends with, you maybe went to grad school with, that actively still do science on a day-to-day basis?
I've had a couple of technicians with PhDs, and they're in the lab all the time. And that's what actually frees me up to do other things. Is I've got people that are really better at doing things than I am. I mean, in my group, we do a lot of cell culture. I personally have never done tissue culture. And they tried to teach me, and they finally sent me away because they got tired of my forehead prints on the safety cabinet. because I couldn't help but lean forward to try and look. So
All right, everybody else, do you still have PhDs? You're 10, 15 years out, still actively doing research?
Not in my lab, but I have a fellow faculty member here. She's in hemonc. She does like platelet and heme oxygen biochemistry stuff, and she is still in the lab doing radioactive experiments a couple times a week. Personally, for me, it's not that I don't like to. I am not good at switching the brain from a writing intensive or a strategic kind of meeting or thinking deeply on something to then going in the lab. Like, to me, the lab is very meditative, right? You just like, you know, we do a lot of cell culture. You're just like feeding the cells, splitting the cells. It's very hard for me to switch back and forth. So that was another major driver for why. But a lot of people are better at it. So it's kind of a personal.
How about in industry, friends?
I think certainly maybe some places in industry. I'm not sure about Gilead and others, but for example, our company has a very scientific track. So one could progress all the way up into what we call staff scientist, which may be, somewhat similar to NIH, but here the staff scientist is at the same level as senior directors. So people who would be considered maybe senior PIs. Here one can do science and be compensated at the level of being a scientist and not necessarily a PI or a manager or a director or somebody else that is non-bench based. And so even last year, I was in the bench as well, having chosen more that principal scientist track. So there are maybe a little bit more flexibility in terms of, I think, industry, but not all companies have this, of course.
I would say personally, I don't know of any of my PhD friends who are still at the bench at this point. But within Gilead, we don't have something quite as nicely structured as what Jason described. But what we do have, and you see it primarily in our medicinal chemistry group, they are still at the bench. I would say all the way up to the director level. And that is something that's pretty common for medicinal chemistry, but for the biology side, it's actually not that common to see a director level scientist engaging in the bench, I'd say willingly.
Willingly. Right. Don't make me go pipette anymore. Nobody wants to see that. I think that what we hear in the theme there is that there are opportunities if you do want to. And there's opportunities if you want to have that more strategic vision of where science is going. And all of us have chosen to have more of the strategic vision of where science is going, knowing that we support it in lots of different ways. So when you think back to, your postdoc, et cetera, as you're kind of moving in, what do you think is the key skill, the key things that made you a competitive candidate for the roles that you're in now? Sandra, how about we start with you?
Sure. I think one of the key skills for me is I identified very early that I needed to be flexible. And that's something that I've really just cultivated over time. It was also a mental shift for me, making that transition from academia to industry. I realized I didn't have, indefinite time to work on this question. The team wanted answers, they wanted deliverables, which I had to really learn what that meant. And there were timelines associated with that. And so I needed to quickly assess what was being asked of me, what was the deliverable, and how can I get there? And with research, we all know that, your first attempt may not work. Subsequent attempts may not work. So it was really about trying to figure out, well, what's the best approach to answer this question? And so I needed to pivot. And if I pivoted to a different technique and was able to get the answer, everyone was happy. There was no question about that. And I realized very quickly I needed to be as flexible as I could be, both with my time, but also with my approaches. And I think that flexibility has also helped me in other ways, being adaptable to changing environments. It's industry, there's fluctuations both in the structure of the company, in your managers, as well as even what we're focused on strategy-wise. So I've learned to basically roll with the punches. And I think it's really served me well because it was a mental shift that I needed to be able to do, to really take myself out of it. It's not about me. It's about what needs to be done, and having a clear vision of that really helped me to grow and learn in this position.
All right, Eric, how about you? What made you have the awesome skill sets to work where you are?
You know, for me, there was a tremendous amount of timing. I was looking for jobs. My now ex-wife and I were both looking for jobs at the same time. And, you know, that's tremendously difficult. And it was back in the days when you thumbed through the back of Science or Nature and you looked for job advertisements. And one day I thumbed through and I was like, oh, that actually sounds a lot like Tracy, my ex. And turned the page and I'm like, oh, hey, these two jobs, that sounds like me. And these two jobs are in fact in the same place. And, you know, it turns out we were both good fits for our jobs. And you know, so there happened to be two jobs at the same place. I'd always envisioned that I would have a career in academia, hopefully like a state school. It was kind of the mid-sized state university, big enough to have a PhD program, but not, you know, not one of the big ones. And never dreamed that I would be working for the USDA for my career. And I absolutely love it. And it's turned out to be much more like an academic career. We don't have a lot of students around the place. And I don't have to teach. But you know, for me, it was timing. I mean, the USDA was in desperate need of someone that had a background in protein biochemistry, because this was late 2003, right before the first BSE case hit. And they needed someone that could work with proteins in dilute solutions and come up with some data and do some very specific things at the time. And, you know, since then, it's just kind of morphed to doing different things.
I think one of the coolest things about what you and Tracy did when you switched into the USDA was neither one of you had ever worked in animals.
Oh yeah, it was honestly, it was terrifying. Like I came to a job where I thought I was going to have to up my mass spec skill set from, you know, circular dichroism and NMR. And the first week someone says, hey, we're going to go necropsy a sheep. Do you want to come? And I'm like, no, and said yes. And it was awful. I mean, it was just not my bag of tricks. But I mean, it's something I couldn't go out and do it by myself, but I can be helpful. And, you know, and it was a learning experience. And, you know, but you have to do new things. And, you know, whether it be the fact that you're not comfortable, you don't know how to do tissue culture work, but you find somebody that does. I mean, some of my very early career stuff was genetics, and I didn't know anything about genetics, but I knew someone that did, and we hired him in as a postdoc. And you've got to just change, because you know, in academia, you have a little bit more of ability to drive where you're going. But the reality is the funding, what's available, what they're willing to fund changes too. And, you know, that's more pronounced in other places than in academia. But even in academia, it would be very unusual if you could just go through your entire career doing one type of science, like the type of science that you're trained to do. It's just, you're forced in other areas, you know, in other career paths.
Right, being flexible and being open. Like, never thought you guys would work in deer populations or pig populations, and then that's what you did. How about you, Jason? What made you have the skill sets in order to be successful where you are now?
Yeah, these are really like relevant questions. I mean, even also browsing through the, you know, Q&A that's kind of like streaming and touches, I think, on very similar I don't want to call it anxiety. I certainly felt some anxiety about will I be successful after my postdoc at NIH. That is certainly one of the most important questions on your mind. And I think what helped for me was that I really established, I think, a pretty clear, honest relationship with my postdoc advisor, very upfront that I knew I wanted to transition to industry. So there was no misaligned expectations of my PI thinking they're going to support me toward academia, whereas I'm actually going a different direction. So having clear expectations, which is a skill set actually that very well transfers to industry, being aligned and communicating very clear where you want to go and having them align with you. People are, I find, in both in academia and industry, very supportive of what you want to do if you are just very upfront about what you want. And sometimes knowing what you want is maybe a little hard to know at times. But so that really helped. And then once I knew I wanted to go into industry, acquiring certain skill sets that allowed me to apply to jobs and be a competitive candidate happened at NIH. And there are many of these kind of career panel things, but specifically at NCI, for some of the people in attending that have, I assume they still have these workshops. I found them to be incredibly useful. I think just literally just changing the format of your CV so that your skill sets, your work experience, and your school and your publications or in that order was the defining difference between getting interview calls versus, because when you're an academic, you think publications are the first thing, but then the industry people are not looking for. So there are some really practical things also that allowed me to transition successfully.
All right, Cindy, how about you? What were the cool skills you learned here that transitioned you to being an awesome faculty?
So I guess it's slightly related to my specific field, right? So I mean, I was a biochemist by training, but I did vascular biology in grad school. So I knew that's what I wanted to be my research focus. And when I got to NIH, my lab was actually in the clinical center. So it was very much a human-based lab, which really worked out well for me. Essentially, I learned how to speak like a plain old doctor, not a PhD doctor. I guess it was having this ingrained sense of curiosity and desire to master what it was I'm talking about. I'm a professor in the Department of Medicine in the Division of Cardiology. I think I'm one of 5 PhDs in our cardiology department here, and it's partly because I am able to, shift between talking about, intracellular signaling pathways and, pathogenesis of aortic stenosis, right? And those are, I'm not trained as an MD, I never was. And so I learned all that on the fly. So it was kind of, so I think someone else said it was an adaptability. So that's what I think made me successful scientifically. What actually made me successful as a manager, Lori can tell you, I'm very detail oriented, possibly, maybe a little bit OCD as some people are. I'm extremely organized. I enforce that in my people who work for me. Files need to be saved a certain way so I can find them without having to spend an hour looking for something that was labeled, TIFF from Thursday, right? So kind of managerial and organizational skills in terms of people and working, but also in terms of my time management. I think way back, there was an OITE thing on time management and like personality types. I do things like time blocking. I'm always looking for better ways to be more efficient because, I'm 45 now. I don't want to work as hard as I did as a postdoc and grad student, right? I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm trying to be more efficient with my time, which I think people probably who have small children feel similarly. So kind of mastering yourself in terms of when you work best, when you are brain dead, right? Make those, mindless meetings during those times, stuff like that.
Oh yes, mindless meetings. We all have those, don't we? That meeting could have been an email. It sounds like everybody really likes their job. So what I'd love to hear is what's your favorite thing and if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing, what would you change? So who wants to tackle that one first? All right, Cindy, you go.
I could go first. So I will not lie. So yes, I got tenure in September. Probably not a day, certainly a week, possibly not a day goes by where I literally say, screw this job, I'm done. Like, I'm not lying. Academia has the absolute highest highs, and it has the absolute most gut-wrenching lows. And I'm sure other jobs are very similar, but they're personal in this job, right? I'm at a R1 institution. My lab is essentially a small business, right? We are 100% dependent on NIH grants, which for anyone who doesn't know, being at the intramural program, are absolutely horrific right now. It's 11 percentile to get an NHLBI R01. Last session I submitted 2. I'm submitting another one in 2 weeks. I have no clue what's going to happen. I'm out of money in about a month. I'm going to be supported. What does that mean? No clue, right? That being said, making discoveries, I have a patent that we're trying to send to like a biotech company to license, right? I'm mentoring amazing people, right? We're getting cool data that has supported this 8-year-long hypothesis that we've had. So it's amazing. But then the day-to-day of actually being a successful faculty, even when you're tenured, even at an amazing place like Pitt, it's no joke. Yeah, unfortunately, it all comes down to money. So those are the bad things, right? If I could take a magic wand, I would move back to the intramural program in a hot second. Every time I talk to Manfred or Bill, I say that, right? I would. It's amazing, magical, magical place for any postdoc who are there. Enjoy it, because there's no other place like it.
All right, Sandra, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll tackle this question. The thing I think, well, let's see, what do I like the most about my job? I think for me, it's the people. I've always been a collaborator at heart. It was something I was actually dinged for a lot in earlier positions was, don't help that person, help get your work done. And now I get to help people, and I get to work with people from different groups. It is very cross-functional, the work that I do. And so I get to interact with those groups, but I also get to act with people within my group and then our larger structured organization. For me, that's what keeps me showing up every day is I work with some really cool scientists, and I think everyone there is incredibly skilled, regardless of their degree and training. And it's a fun place for me to work at, working with these different people. And I'm closer to helping patients and drug discovery and, patient care than I've ever been. But honestly, that to me still feels like a very distant goal. So I focus on the everyday and who can I help today? What are we doing? What are the things that need to be done? I feed off of that. That's personally, I find a lot of fulfillment there. If I had a magic wand, I would wave it and make things more stable. The stability question is, I think a lot of people think about industry and they think about how insecure it can be in terms of job safety. I think it's a bigger question than that. For me, I was always worried about, oh no, I have to be prepared to just get fired at any minute when I step into industry. And instead, I've, knock on wood, been able to stay in one company for almost 5 years now. But the stability within that company has definitely at times been very shaky. And I think that's what people don't talk enough about is the restructuring that can typically happen. And one of the things that happened to me was moving from inflammation research to oncology research, something I have no experience in. And so it's one of those things where that favorite skill of mine of being flexible really took center stage. And I really have had to learn a whole new field. And I don't claim to be an expert at it, but I think I'm doing my best to learn what it is for me to bring my old skill set into this one and how to make those things marry and really propel the research forward. So it's not something I anticipated, and I don't know how else to share that to everyone, but to say that there are a lot more ways in which industry careers can be unstable or tricky in terms of security and job security. So you may still have a job, but it may not look like the job you applied for. And so I think that's one of the things that if I could wave a magic wand, I would kind of stabilize that a bit.
All right, Eric, how about you?
What was the question?
What's your favorite part of the job, and what if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change?
So probably the favorite part of my job is that, well, I mean, the best thing about it is at some level that I don't have to apply for funding. Our funding is congressionally allocated. The downside of that is that it's congressionally allocated, and so I don't have to write grants. You can write grants, but funding sources are somewhat limited for us. So opening up, because one government agency does not fund another government agency. I mean, honestly, when we did this however long ago, it was difficult to have me come out because you couldn't buy me a plane ticket when this event was done in person. It was, those were complicated issues. But for me, so like the best thing is I don't have to apply for funding. We have a fairly long funding cycle, but there are ups and downs. There can be budget cuts that affect an individual research area. For me personally, the funding's been pretty good, but for the past 10 years, but 10 years ago, they wanted to cut our budget by 50%. And then fast forward 10 years and we've had additional funds added and we never had the cut. So it's a little bit up and down in that regard. If I could change one thing about my job is we would have a federal budget on October 1 every year, because we can spend 10% of our budget per month through a continuing resolution. That's approximately what it comes to. But that means you can't buy or replace a piece of equipment. And so, we're just now at a point where we could buy or replace equipment, and we only have until the beginning of June to do it, because then funding deadlines begin, or spending deadlines begin, depending on the price of things. So if I could change one thing about my job, it is that we would have a budget on October 1 when the fiscal year begins.
It drives me crazy every year. All right, Jason, you favorite thing and magic wand.
Favorite thing is I think I've been very fortunate, but also I think, maybe this is a general life advice, not just career specific. Follow your passions and your dreams. Define what you want to get out of life and then go after it. And I think that's pretty much what I've done here in industry. I found that this specific place was the best place to do so. I think otherwise academia would have just as been a good match as well. I think here I found that if I want to do chimeric antigen research and I want to bring this into the clinic, I found that this is the kind of place I could do it best. So this is the thing I really want to work on, and I get to work on it. So that's really the best thing. I'm doing what I want to do in life, which is really great, especially at this stage in my life. And the second magic wand is, I think if I had to, I would just create maybe similar to what was brought up previously. I think a little bit better stability. Industry can certainly have quite a bit of ups and downs, and you don't always get to choose who you want to work with. Sometimes you have to work with people who may not be matched to your personality or this or that. But one can't have it all, I guess. Mostly you gotta roll with the punches, again, as previously stated, but also try to align so that you're working with the group of people that you really like. on teams that are well supportive of you. But it can be certainly a little bit more up and down than in academia or at places like NIH and government entities.
I have a question that seems to be showing up in the Q&A quite often. And it's really Jason, Sandra, and Eric. Cindy, we know you had to have a postdoc in order to get your job, so you can chill for a moment. But Jason, I see you're still unmuted. Do you have to have a postdoc to go into industry?
No, that was certainly one of the answers I gave. And in fact, I would say that in industry, sometimes having a postdoc and too many postdocs actually starts hurting your ability, in fact. So I think it's certainly not a requirement. And if it's a postdoc that was a set of experiences, of skill sets that you've earned that matches what the job is, I think that is recommended. But simply having done a postdoc will not, necessarily make you stand out from other candidates.
Sandra, same thing at Gilead?
It's, yeah, the same thing at Gilead. I think it really only dictates what level you can enter into the company as. And so certain positions will have certain requirements. I will say, though, to some of the people who are maybe on the fence and not sure if they want to go into industry, but not sure if they want to do the postdoc, there are quite a few companies that have industry postdoc positions. And those oftentimes can be tricky to navigate, but they're much shorter in duration. Most companies limit them to 1 or 2 years. Our company has one that we recently started, and it's limited to 2 years. And a lot of times those positions are meant to provide you with the experience, and they are not necessarily meant to act as a pipeline into the company for a position. So that's something that you can keep in mind when thinking about postdoc or not, but you don't necessarily have to.
How about you, Eric? Do you have to have a postdoc to get a job at the USDA?
Oops. It's sort of a mixed bag. You could probably get a PI type position without a postdoc, but it would be an unusual thing. But the length of your postdoc really, like having, a 5-year postdoc and a whole bunch of publications is not an absolute requirement. We actually there's a lot of times we end up hiring a postdoc when we have a vacant position, and it's sometimes it almost ends up being an interview on the job. That's not an absolute case because we have to compete all positions, so there's no guarantees, but it's fairly unusual for there to, for someone to not have a postdoc, but it isn't an absolute. There's certainly people that are, finishing up their PhDs and have been hired in, but a lot of those also are DVM PhDs, so they've got a little bit more time and a fairly specialized skill set to begin with.
Cool. All right. So the question that's burning in everyone's mind is, what's a typical starting salary for someone at your organization? Starting, not yours, but coming in with a PhD to a professor. And then for Jason and Sandra, what would that title also be called? What is the first job they're getting typically at your institutions? So Cindy, I'll start with you and we'll kind of work our way around.
Yeah, so I went right from postdoc, granted I had a longer postdoc, to Pitt, our one institution. 8 years ago, my starting salary was $125,000. Based on all the other places, I had 4 other job offers. U Chicago was abysmal, offered me less than what I was making at NIH. Case Western was above 100, maybe 110, and Northwestern was, I think, 120. Kind of an unspoken rule that I think sometimes happens is the better the school, the worse the salary. Because there's this toxic, horrible thing about academia where they think that they're so amazing, people want to work for them for free. So that is slowly changing, I think. Pitt is certainly better than that, at least in my department when I got hired, it was. Based on that, again, this was 2015. But the best thing you can do is share your salary, because the more you share it, other people are going to share it. And that's super important. And every place I was interviewing at, I asked people who had just come in before me what their salary was, what they got for startup, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to get shortchanged. I was very forward in that. So.
All right, Sandra, how about you?
Yeah, so for Gilead, the starting position would be a research scientist. That is the first position where a PhD is required. If you don't have a PhD, it would be somewhere between a senior associate scientist and a research scientist. The starting salary would be about $120,000. And I would say for markets like California, that can be higher. The starting would probably be somewhere around 140 and up. And then I think if you've had a little bit more experience, you can sometimes negotiate that into the starting salary. A longer postdoc, prior research and experience that directly impacts the team. These starting salaries can be negotiable, but the range, I would say, for most places is about 120. It's probably actually the midline, because Seattle is a bit of an expensive market, just in terms of cost of living. But yeah, that's what I would say Gilead is kind of starting at.
Eric, how about you? And are they coming in as GS?
Yeah, I mean, most of the PI positions in the USDA are GS pay scale. So you'd be coming in right out of a PhD, or with, a minimal postdoc, you would be coming in as a 12. And when I started, everyone came in as a 12. They were still hiring in some locations. They were still hiring people as 11s in a PI position. And but now with postdoc experience and a good publication record, you might come in as a 13. And it pretty much tops out as a 15. There's some exceptions to that, but there aren't very many.
Cool.
The salary is not great, but the benefits are fantastic.
Right. It's the whole package, right? It's not
It is
just
the whole package. Like, that's the other thing is that I would say is, if you're looking at particularly a government job that would be in that GS pay scale, you could think that you're being woefully underpaid, but by the time you've been there for 10 years, it's a whole different ball game, and secure funding and things like that, and work-life balance add up to be quite a bit, not including like just the retirement benefits. As you get older, you start to realize that you can keep your health insurance when you retire is a big deal. And that was completely lost on me at the age of 32. I didn't have any idea what that meant. I was happy to have health insurance, because when I was a postdoc, you didn't have health insurance. And so keeping it when I retired seemed inconsequential, but now that seems like a big deal. And it has a pension plan, which is hard to find these days. So, and for me personally, that'll come out to be like 30% of my essentially 30% of my retirement salary when I retire. And those things really add up in a way that's, hard to imagine when you're in your late 20s or your early 30s and you're looking for your first job. You don't even necessarily put all that together. And for me, probably the eye opener that I had was, I did what a lot of people might do who had a father that was a faculty member in biochemistry. I said, "Hey, Dad, are we crazy to consider these jobs?" And he said, "No, me not taking a USDA job was the worst financial mistake I've ever made in my life."
wow. Thanks, Dad. Right?
I think he was right.
I will say too about academia, the benefits thing. I don't have kids, but if I did, they would go to Pitt for free, right? That is a huge cost savings that every university has is different. We also have amazing matching benefits, right? So Pitt actually is one of the few places where we actually get a research incentive kickback. We have to cover 75% of our salary on grants, But if I do that, I can get up to 10% of the indirect costs, which are paid by the NIH, back as a bonus. So generally people can get, if you have an R, depending on what your indirects are and what you spend, you can get between 10 and 15 up to $50,000 bonus. So all of those details matter. It's not just salary. Benefits are huge.
Absolutely. As I have a kid going to college, I often wonder why we are not still. How about you, Jason? Typical starting salary, and what is that title for someone coming in?
Yeah, I think for a wet lab scientist, it's going to be scientist 1 for a PhD, scientist 2 for postdoc. That's kind of the norm in industry. The salary ranges, I think mostly in the Glassdoor. There's also like a Reddit thread on like biotech careers, and they have a Google like doc where people have been filling it in, and there's actually pretty good transparency there. I actually think that one's better than Glassdoor because you don't have to worry about retaliation from your employers or something like that. So I would recommend, I assume, people will be able to find these things if you just Google it. So, but yeah, I think 110 to 120 is a reasonable expectation for somewhere within that scientist 1 to 2 range. And as with what Cynthia was saying and Eric and others, there's trade-offs for other parts of the benefits. So the salary, I think, maybe are similar levels in industry, and especially in the startup-ish, more tech-infused world. The benefits are gonna be at a premium because, as Sandra mentioned, there is also more risk. You are taking on more risk that the company might go under next year if your project fails, or your department might get laid off because they made a strategic decision. However, the risk you take on, therefore, is that when the company does well, you'll make a pretty significant amount. So I think the important aspect of if you're looking at startup-ish industry companies is you really want to look at options. You really want to look at the different kinds of stocks and other components of the equity benefits that come with it. Because let's say you were at an NVIDIA type of situation from the early days, that will really matter to you, I think, 10 years later. So there are, you tend to get better upside if the early stage company does well.
And when the company does well, you do well too, typically, right? With the bonus structure for both Jason
As
and
well as
Sandra.
bonuses. And also, yeah, there's typically expectation is about 10% salary yearly bonuses. I think pretty typical for an entry level scientist 1 or 2 position.
That's very nice. Cindy's like, we get no bonuses. So I think we've done some really interesting kind of conversations. One thing that often we hear from younger scientists is that work-life balance. They're looking for a new job to solve work-life balance. So how have you promoted work-life balance for each one of yourselves? Because we know a new job is not going to fix that. Jason, you're nodding. Why don't you hit that one first? How do you promote work-life balance for yourself?
I think it's definitely very important. So I am a huge proponent of this. You can't have it always. There are some times when there's crunch time, and you just gotta work hard in evenings or even weekends. But I think overall, I think there's pretty good work balance in industry. It all depends on the company and the team you're with. But certainly in our team, we have a policy of no meetings unless you really need it. I think the meetings piling up is usually causing some of the overworking situations. Plus, on average, I think most people go home around 4 or 5 p.m. and I think that's pretty reasonable. And also the policy is if you don't have work at the bench that day, work from home, and that's perfectly fine as long as you have other things to get done in your own time. So I think certainly at our company and our team, we try to make it a high priority.
About you, Sandra, what's work-life balance mean to you?
So for me, it is still, I think, a constant struggle to find that whatever the balance can be. I think what I've spent a lot of time doing more recently is being very intentional about my time. I think, at our company, it's a loose 9 to 5 structure. Those are the hours that people anticipate you will be working. Our positions are largely on site. We don't really have a very flexible schedule when it comes to research biology, but I'd say there's still this expectation sometimes that people believe you will answer an email after hours, or you'll be working on that deck for the presentation on the weekend. And that's something I very intentionally have stopped doing. I no longer work after hours unless it is something that I feel like I gain something from it. But I'm incredibly intentional about my time. So I don't take emails, phone calls. I never actually got any phone calls after hours, so I'll be clear about that. I just try not to work outside of business hours. And I don't believe my work suffers for it. I'm still able to meet deliverables. So I think it's completely reasonable to expect that. I do spend quite a bit of time planning vacations, and I schedule them ahead of time. So I try to quarterly take off time. Sometimes I tag it onto a big meeting. I immediately will leave after a big meeting and go on a little vacation. And people expect that of me, and they know it's going to happen. And so it's understood. So I think you have to set boundaries. I'm learning to do that. And I think just being intentional about the time I take off. I don't roll over more than five days of personal leave a year. And that's because I don't want to accumulate a lot of leave. I want to use it all now. And so I try to be reasonable and leave 5 days, but we do get a lot of PTO. We do get 2 weeks of corporate shutdown. So we get a week in the summer and a week during the Christmas, December, January break. And I think that's incredibly generous and amazing. And I take full advantage of that and tack on even more time and extend my trips. So it's one of the things that keeps me sane, keeps me happy and still here, is traveling and seeing the world and actually living a life, right? So what's the point in, making money if you can't use it? Some would say, but I think the boundaries and being intentional about setting your time and what your limits are is something I've learned, and I'm continuing to practice and put into practice.
She's stumped on work-life.
I can go next. Sorry, what was the specific question? Just how work-life balance, how I do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I will start by saying I don't have kids, so luckily I have 100% flexibility. I have a fur baby and a husband, and my husband, because we live in Pittsburgh and for certain reasons, he's kind of just retired. So I'm very lucky in that I have a home life that enables me to do the crazy hours of working that I sometimes do, which we are in the throes of grant. My husband calls it grant season. Starts about in hard earnest about 6 weeks before the grant is due, and all bets are off. Sometimes I'm working normal hours. Sometimes I'll just stay home and not work at all because I worked a crazy hour the day before. But I think of it as a whole year thing, right? Normal, if it's not the 6 weeks right before the grant is due, I have a pretty good work-life balance. I come in to my lab, maybe 9 or 10, 4 or 5 days a week. I leave 5 or 6, depending. I might have coffee with friends. The lifestyle of an academic, when you're not rushing to get the money, is beautiful. It's wonderful. Someone was talking about vacation. Nobody keeps track of my vacation time. I've never had to put in a time card. I can take what I want, because essentially, if you're getting the grants and your lab's doing the work, you can do whatever you want, right? And that means not only with your personal time, but with your science and stuff like that. So the freedom of academia in terms of your work-life balance is amazing, because you can do what you want with it. You can, like I have friends who have just had babies. And so, she is staying at home with the toddler and the baby until 10 or 11 in the morning because her husband has a weird shift thing or whatever. And then she'll go into lab or do her work from home until like 6 or 7, and then they switch. And so that flexibility is great for their life. I think that's one of the big benefits of academia is you can make it fit your life. And I've been writing, there's a bunch of people who are talking about like work-life balance and how do I balance this? There's no one answer. And that's the hard thing is you kind of have to do your own value exercise, right? There's this thing, it's, what is burnout? It is the disconnect between what you have to do and what you value, right? And so you need to like do some deep soul searching, which, some of those OITE events that I went to as a postdoc really helped me figure that out. But you need to figure out what is it that makes you go, right?
Yeah.
Is, what?
Cindy, I hate cutting you off.
Yes.
But
Go
they're
for it.
giving me the ding dong.
Oh, geez.
So as we wrap up, Eric, we'll start with you. One piece of advice to folks hopping into the field, what would you give them?
I honestly don't know. There isn't one piece of cohesive advice that I could come up with. I think it really comes down to if you find something you like to do. It doesn't matter, even if it means you leave science, find something you like to do, because if you aren't happy coming to work, it's really hard to come to work for the better part of the remainder of your life. I mean, because you're going to be working until you're old and gray and like those people that you see down the hallway. And if you aren't loving it, find something else to do and do it early. Like, don't, if you're going to make a change when you think you should make a change. Don't sit on it for 10 years and then try and make a change, because it doesn't get easier.
Jason?
Not much more to add other than what Eric said, which is, know what you want in life and go after it. Life is too short, I think, you got to enjoy moments spent with your family, friends, and if possible, work that you actually enjoy with coworkers that you like being around.
Cindy?
Yeah, I did a lot of complaining here today. I do love my job. Which is funny, right?
Grant season. It's grant season.
Exactly, it's grant season. Pick me at a really bad time. The biggest thing, take care of you. Figure out what you like, what makes you go, what do you want to do? And like I said at the beginning, I quit my first postdoc after 3 months. Best decision of my life, right? We're all adults, right? You have a PhD. You're over 20. You're an adult. Like, you can make your own decisions. You don't have to do anything because you think like people have feelings about it. No. Take control of your own career and go after what you want.
Perfect. And Sandra?
Yeah, I definitely echo everyone's statements. I think, that value assessment is important. You need to understand what drives you. Why are you doing this? And what you hope to get out of these positions, because honestly, it's not the money. I'm telling you now, nice bonuses and great benefits. Those are nice. Those are wonderful. Those are perks of the job fulfilling something in you. If you're not fulfilled at work, it's going to show. You're going to be miserable. And there's no amount of vacation and traveling that can come with that. So do the assessments. I did a lot of personal assessments when I was at OITE and kind of following really a burnout period as a postdoc. So it helped me a lot. And I think I encourage people to continue to do them. I still do them because your values change over time. And so
that is true. That is true. Well, everyone, I have really enjoyed watching all of your careers grow since the 2 decades I've known most of you. It's been just phenomenal to see everyone. We appreciate your advice today on, taking charge of your own career, thinking about the pros and the cons, learning how to be flexible as you build your long-term career paths, and just your joy of seeing the next generation kind of have it hopefully a little bit easier in their career path than we all did. I wish you all adieu. The next session, for those of you who are staying for panels, is on business of science. So tech transfer, business development, etc. So we hope to see you there. It's been really, honestly, everyone, it's been so good to see you. I hope you all have a phenomenal rest of your day. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.